Have you ever just stopped and thought about your tap water? I mean, really thought about it? You turn the handle and out it comes, clean and clear. But what did it actually take to get it that way? Well, it turns out there's this incredible journey of science and engineering behind every single glass. So let's pull back the curtain and see what it takes to make our water safe to drink.
So, what really goes on between, say, a river and your faucet? It's way more than just straining out a few leaves and some mud. We're talking about a full-on, multi-stage battle against a whole world of invisible threats.
And that right there is the heart of the challenge. You know, the water out in our environment, even when it looks perfectly pristine, can be absolutely teeming with hidden dangers. So before we can even get into the solutions, we first have to understand the enemy. These threats really fall into four big categories. You've got your living dangers, the microbial stuff like bacteria and viruses. Then there are chemical hazards, things from farms and factories. You can even have radiological hazards from elements that are just naturally in the ground. And of course, there's the physical stuff, the silt and debris you can actually see. And here's the kicker. Each one needs a totally different strategy to take it out. Now, out of all those threats, there's one word that is absolutely critical to know: pathogen. When we say microbial hazards, this is what we're really talking about. These are the bugs that make you sick, and protecting public health means first and foremost getting these pathogens out of our water. That is job number one, period.
All right, so how does a treatment plant even begin this fight? Well, you start with the most obvious problem: all the physical gunk floating around in the water that makes it look cloudy or dirty.
The water basically enters this kind of physical gauntlet. The first goal is pretty straightforward: make it clear. And that means getting all those suspended particles, everything from fine silt to tiny bits of organic debris, to come out of the water. This whole thing happens in four really clever steps. First up, coagulation. They add chemicals that give all those tiny, slippery particles a sticky coat. Then, in flocculation, the water is stirred very gently, which makes all those sticky particles start bumping into each other and clumping up into bigger, heavier masses we call floc. Next, the water just sits quietly in a big tank. This is sedimentation, and all that heavy floc just sinks right to the bottom. Finally, the much clearer water on top gets passed through filters, things like sand and gravel, to catch any of the even smaller stuff that's left over.
So now the cloudy stuff is gone and the water looks clean. But guess what? The most dangerous threats are still in there and they're completely invisible. So now we shift from a physical battle to a microscopic one. This is where disinfection comes in. This chart actually reveals a super interesting challenge. Chlorine, which is the classic disinfectant, is an absolute powerhouse against bacteria and viruses. But it's got a blind spot. It's not so great against tougher things called protozoa. We're talking about microorganisms like Cryptosporidium, which can be really resistant to chlorine. And that's exactly why other methods like ozone and high-intensity UV light are so important. They're incredibly effective at zapping these stubborn pathogens.
So you might be wondering, if chlorine has this weak spot, why in the world is it the most common disinfectant used? Well, it's because it's effective for a lot of things, and it's pretty affordable. But, and this is a big but, using it involves a critical trade-off that water engineers have to manage perfectly.
And here is that dilemma. The huge benefit is that it kills an enormous range of deadly pathogens and literally saves lives. The drawback? When chlorine mixes with any leftover organic stuff in the water, it can create these other compounds called disinfection byproducts, or DBPs for short.
So how do we weigh that risk? Well, this quote from the World Health Organization just nails it. It says, the health risks from these byproducts are extremely small compared to the risks of not disinfecting the water enough. The message is crystal clear. A tiny, manageable risk from byproducts is way, way better than the deadly risk of a massive waterborne disease outbreak. You simply can't compromise on disinfection.
Okay, we've dealt with the particles. We've dealt with the pathogens. But what about dissolved chemicals? Things like pesticides or industrial waste. You can't just filter those out with sand, and chlorine doesn't kill them. This calls for a whole other level of advanced treatment.
So, how do you fight something you can't see or kill? With some seriously advanced tech. Think of activated carbon as a kind of super sponge. It has a massive surface area that just grabs onto organic chemicals. Then there's ion exchange, which is like a chemical bouncer at a club. It literally swaps out bad ions like nitrate for harmless ones. And reverse osmosis? That's the ultimate security checkpoint, using a membrane so incredibly fine that it can block even tiny dissolved chemicals from getting through. But this doesn't mean every single city needs the most expensive, complex solution out there. The key here is to be smart and efficient.
The technology is always tailored to the specific contaminants found in the local water. It's all about using the right tool for the job, not a sledgehammer for every problem.
So at this point, the water's been cleaned, it's been filtered, it's been disinfected. It's safe. But its journey is not quite over. It still has to travel through miles and miles of pipes to get to your home. And that journey has its own set of risks.
This is the final crucial safeguard. A small, very carefully controlled amount of disinfectant, usually chlorine, is left in the water on purpose. We call this a residual. It basically acts like a bodyguard, protecting the water from anything that might try to sneak into the pipes on the long trip to your house. It's the final layer in what's known as the multiple barrier principle, the whole idea that you need overlapping layers of protection to guarantee safety from the source all the way to your tap.
And really, that brings us right back to why any of this matters. This quote reminds us that this complex, mostly invisible process isn't just some cool engineering feat. It is one of the single greatest public health achievements in all of human history. It's a basic human right and a pillar of modern life.
So we've seen this incredible journey water takes to get clean, but all that amazing technology depends entirely on the quality of the water that comes into the plant, which leaves us with one last really big question. How do we protect our rivers, our lakes, and our groundwater in the first place? Because that's a whole other journey that starts long before the water ever gets to the treatment plant.